I would like here to present some of my work in progress on my dissertation, which, as you said, Robin, is on roughly the pre-Iranian context of the Armenian language, including some of the unrecorded substrate languages. And one of the interfaces that I find interesting is the one with Kartvelian languages. So it has been claimed often that Kartvelian languages especially have played an important role in the early development of Armenian in terms of typology, phonology, morphology. We have, for example, consonantal systems that are almost identical in their makeup and distribution. And there's another agreement, to give an example, which is the lack of phonemic vowel length, which is something that separates Armenian from Proto-Indo-European, but which it also has in common with Kartvelian. And we can mention also the absence of grammatical gender, for instance. So famously, Gerhard Deters said that Armenian was a Mischsprache, a mixed language, which had resulted in part from a language shift. So in prehistory, Kartvelian speakers had shifted to the Armenian language over generations, but retained some of the traits of their, so to say, native language. But the problem with such evidence is that it is maybe not very tangible, and questions of timing can be quite difficult to address. So I think in this case, lexical material is something that provides a little more exact evidence for language contact and the place and time, perhaps, of language contact. But in terms of loanwords between Armenian and Kartvelian, there are not very many. And work on this topic is perhaps not as developed as the topic of Iranian loanwords, for instance, in Armenian. So I've given in my short paper here a few references to previous works on this topic, and there may be ones that I have excluded, not on purpose. I may not be aware of them. So we have, of course, in literary times, so the literary tradition of Armenian and Georgian begin approximately at the same time. And after this period, we have, of course, borrowings between the two languages, and many of them have already been identified by, for instance, Acharyan in his etymological dictionary. So here I would like to give a few examples of loanwords that precede this period of from the pre-literate period. So one of these layers are the loanwords in the Armenian language from the Zan languages, specific branch of the Kartvelian languages, including the two languages of Laz and Megrelian. And under 2.1, there are a few examples of words that can be convincingly tied to a San lexeme. We can add to these, the lexemes in 4 to 6, a few examples of words that can be reconstructed quite convincingly for Proto-San based on a Georgian lexeme. So based on some of the sound correspondences that we already know exist for San. These loans are, of course, very interesting in themselves, but in relation to the question of Armenian prehistory, they are perhaps not as relevant because, as you can see, their forms are the Armenian forms are almost completely identical to the San forms. So this means that virtually no sound change have occurred since these words were borrowed, meaning that it could probably not have occurred much earlier than the first millennium AD. So another very interesting set of words is the Kartvelian words. If we look to Kartvelian, words that seem to have originated in earlier stages of Armenian, what can be collectively referred to as Proto-Armenian, even though this is a problematic term. We can use it here conveniently to refer to the several stages that go between Proto-Indo-European and Classical Armenian. So one set of words that are presented under 3.1, just a few examples, are words, Georgian words, where the thematic vowel, which was lost, of course, in prehistoric times in Armenian, seem to have been preserved. So we have, for instance, Georgian erdo, meaning a flat roof. This is obviously identical to the Armenian word ert, which is inflected as an O stem. So it seems that Georgian has preserved this thematic vowel and adopted this as a vowel stem into the Georgian system, where these sort of stems are permitted. We also find an older stratum. Some examples are 11 to 13, where even more sound changes have not been completed in the donor form. So a famous example, perhaps, is this poni, meaning a ford, so a place for crossing a river, which seems to be, or most probably is, from an earlier form of Armenian hun, before two sound changes. So the change of P, perhaps more specifically aspirated P, or perhaps it was an F at this stage, to H, and before the raising of the vowel O before nasal. We also have some slightly more problematic examples, especially number 13, which is the word for kidney, Georgian tirkmeli, and Armenian yerikam, which seems to be a loan that predates the loss of the initial T, aspirated T before a resonant here in the Proto-Armenian form. The problematic part is, of course, that the etymology of this word in Proto-Indo-European terms is not very well understood, if at all, and also there seems to have been some analogical, some further morphological processes affecting this word in Georgian. We can add some more speculative examples even, and these are words that are not only found in Georgian, so under 3.2, but also attested in one or two of the San languages. So this means that they must be at least as old as the Proto-Georgian San level of this clade of the Kartvelian languages. So one that I find particularly interesting to draw an example here forward is a number 15, the word for crane in Proto-Georgian San. Perhaps also this was present at the Proto-Kartvelian stage, in Georgian Tsero, and in Megrelian Charo. So we see here sound changes affecting this in the San languages, which regular correspondences which established this word for Proto-Georgian San. This looks to me as perhaps the unattested reflex of the original word for the Indo-European word for crane, which had an initial palatal G, and only in Armenian of all Indo-European languages does this yield a voiceless affricate. So this seems to be a very good potential candidate for a source of this borrowing. Unfortunately, this word is not attested in Classical Armenian. We find only krunk, which has undergone some quite obscure changes that are not very well understood, and perhaps this hapax grey from Grigor Magistros, but again, the development of these forms are not completely well accounted for. If this is true, I think this is a very interesting example of a potential piece of evidence for the original nominative surviving for some time into Proto-Armenian. Finally, we have some words from 17 to 21 under 3.3, where we can identify in Proto-Kartvelian a number of words beginning with re, which can be interpreted as an intermediate stage of the development from initial w in Proto-Indo-European into g in Armenian. So the word for wine, Guinea, famously, is perhaps an earlier form. Rueno or Ruino is the source of Kartvelian Ruino. And we can add a number of examples to these where a Proto-Indo-European root, something looking very much like a Proto-Indo-European root, is reflected in Proto-Kartvelian, but with an initial roi replacing w. So it is possible to speculate, at least, that these were borrowed through an early form of Armenian. And there are some even more speculative examples. I won't go into much detail about those. So just very tentatively, what we can say about these loans is that the earliest loans from Proto-Armenian into the Kartvelian languages are that they predate a number of sound changes, which I've listed here on the 3.4 from A to E. And they include the raising of vowels, raising of O and E before nasals, the complete development of word initial w to g, the affrication or the lenition of initial p, perhaps the loss of initial t before resonant, and perhaps also the addition of the prothetic vowel. There's an example of this further up in the document. Something we can draw on here to give some sort of idea about the absolute dating of these loans are the Hurro-Uragian loanwords, or perhaps more specifically the Uragian loanwords in Armenian, because we have some idea of when these loans occurred, namely during the kingdom of Urartu in the 9th to 6th century, approximately BC. So in these borrowings, there are unfortunately not many examples which involve these specific phonemes, but we do have, for instance, poch, the word for loan or exchange, seems to be from an Urartian correspondent of the Hurrian word poche. We have perhaps a word don, which may be from an Urartian reflex of the Hurrian duni, a word for loaf, unfortunately also a hapax legomenon. But it is debated whether this word could be inherited from Proto-Indo-European instead. And we have the name of the lake Van, which also is attested in Urartian, with what can be interpreted as an initial V, and this does not notably undergo the change from V to roi or g. So this, I think, can be used to tentatively conclude that the earliest contacts between Armenian and Kartvelian occurred before the 9th century BCE. And that is what I have. So thank you for your attention.